Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. In a period presently tragically missing to the set of experiences books, every single one of these countries was once a piece of Mexico. These nations were previously territories in a Spanish district, just known as the Captaincy General or Realm of Guatemala. In 1823, they withdrew from Mexico and turned into the Government Republic of Focal America. This was to perpetually change the political, cultural, and monetary cosmetics of the locale that we presently know as Focal America. The breakdown of the principal Mexican realm was the main thrust behind the push for change in the area. At the point when it became obvious that the standard of sovereign Agustin de Iturbide was ill-fated, the states that would proceed to frame Focal America chose to go solo and withdrew. They had moved themselves and held their fate in their own hands. To comprehend what caused the breakdown of the Mexican domain and the Focal American withdrawal, one needs to consider how Mexico was being managed by Spain and the far-reaching push for freedom. Mexico was first colonized by Spain 300 years sooner, in 1521. Named just New Spain, the District of Mexico developed rapidly, with Spanish pioneers showing up by the thousand. Toward the finish of the 1800 years, there were an expected 6 million individuals living in Mexico, and the name Mexico became official in 1824. A considerable lot of individuals were currently local conceived Mexicans, likewise referred to some degree disparagingly as Creoles, significant individuals brought into the world in New Spain to Spanish guardians. These Mexicans were angry of being peered downward on by the Spanish. The Spanish conceived homesteaders were given particular treatment with a portion of land for cultivating and settling. Many individuals in Mexico were additionally of blended foundations, coming from native, Spanish, and Mexican guardians. While entangled in this Mexican circumstance, Spain was becoming up to speed in a rising series of struggles with Napoleon's France. In 1808, Napoleon attacked Spain, and it was an urgent second for the disappointed in New Spain. As the occasion started warming up back in Europe, the Creoles saw their opportunity to oust the Spanish rulers at home. The Mexican progressives were loaded with motivation and chose to strike contrary to the Spanish rule. On September 16th in the year 1810, a Mexican minister chose to tip the main domino. Miguel Hidalgo Costilla stood gladly in the town square of Dolores and proclaimed battle on the Spanish colonialists in a blending discourse to the majority. This energetic invitation to battle immediately became known as the Grito de Dolores, the Call of Dolores, and immediately spread all through Mexico. Hidalgo coordinated a local army and went from one town to another, getting the message out and enlisting an ever-increasing number of willing fighters. That earth-shattering day in September is as yet recognized as Mexico's Day of Autonomy. In late 1810, about 100,000 renegade fighters started to overwhelm towns in Focal Mexico. Over the course of the following couple of years, the autonomy development was going all out, as Creole soldiers assumed command over towns, ports, and significant streets. This was to be known as the Mexican Conflict of Freedom, as the battling and uprisings went on for the greatest aspect of 10 years. Then, in 1820, a Mexican-conceived colonel, Agustin de Iturbide, chose to make it official. Agustin drew up a Declaration of Freedom, which he calls the Arrangement of Iguala. That's what it said: Mexico was currently a free government, with its occupants to be all assembled, paying little mind to race, legacy, or foundation. Iturbide's arrangement likewise swore that a temporary chamber would take care of every single regulatory matter, and that he, Iturbide, would lead the military to direct the progress. At the point when the Spanish emissary showed up in Mexico to evaluate what is going on, he was basically compelled to sign a settlement that implied Mexican freedom. In August 1821, the arrangement of Cordoba was marked, broadcasting the finish of Spanish rule in Mexico. The Creole Colonel Iturbide was named as the head of Free Mexico. The settlement proclaimed that the new province of Mexico would be a free government and that the authority religion was Catholicism. It was to be the main previous Spanish state to have a government after freedom, and it was a brief one at that. No one in Spain was setting up their hands to assume control over the privileged position in Mexico, so in 1822, Iturbide expected the job of the head of Mexico. Despite the fact that he was a success with individuals and the military at first, Iturbide's time in control was almost over when it started. To begin, the authenticity of the government and Mexico's freedom was being addressed by a lot of people back in Europe. Then there was the matter of Iturbide's organization. From its beginning, the sovereign was excessively quick to please and wasted immense measures of cash on extravagant, superfluous celebrations and public works. His wasting implied that public officials, and all the more basically the military, needed to take pay slices of up to 20%. It was assessed that he was burning through multiple times more than the emissary, who'd been in control on sake of the Spanish government. Iturbide was likewise unequipped for settling debates and fulfilling the ceaseless requests from provincial authorities all over Mexico. Frantic to get back his squandered assets, Iturbide presented a 40% local charge, which was typically met with shock. Paper editors were captured for any articles reprimanding the "and" when Iturbide chose to just print more cash. The game was well and really finished. As the show in Mexico unfurled, the Focal American territories were weighing up their choices. Focal America had recently attempted to battle for freedom in 1811 and 1814, however had been decently easily constrained by the Spanish powers. When the Mexican fight for freedom was at long last won, most Focal American pioneers were agreeable to extension to Mexico. Iturbide's vision and arrangement spoke to numerous Focal American legislators, who saw being essential for Mexico as monetarily and decisively helpful. Joining Mexico would give a gigantic lift to exchange open doors with Europe, and the Focal American territories would profit from a focal organization to care for things. Notwithstanding, others were worried about Iturbide's authority and couldn't help contradicting his belief systems. In September 1821, Iturbide sent a letter to the Focal American regions. The letter guaranteed the region's security and backing, yet provided that they consented to addition. While a few Focal American pioneers actually had their second thoughts about extension, it was casted a ballot through, and in January 1823, Focal America was attached to Mexico. The addition gave Mexico its longest boundary ever, extending right down toward the southern tip of Costa Rica. Iturbide sent Mexican soldiers down to monitor things in Focal America, where they were met with striking antagonism. Despite the fact that a few Focal American pioneers had settled on paper to extension, there were bounty of residents eagerly went against to it. Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Nicaragua were especially against the Mexican occupation and started rustling up help for opposition. A developing larger part of Focal Americans needed freedom, from Spain, however, Mexico as well. That's what they trusted. They had acquired the right to self-administer and believed the opportunity should break free unequivocally. They realized what was best for them, not an unfamiliar government. In the meantime, back in Mexico City, things had gone from awful to much more terrible. In a last-ditch effort in late 1822, Iturbide disintegrated Congress and introduced a junta, or military-based government. This went totally against what he had committed to do for Mexico in his arrangement of Iguala. By mid-1823, wrongdoing was on the ascent and the nation had broken up into discrete areas and territories. It was an unquestionable catastrophe. Iturbide had not just lost the help of individuals, yet his own military was currently betraying him. In Walk 1823, he renounced and escaped to Italy humiliated. At the point when insight about the government's breakdown arrived at Focal America, the push for a republic freedom was basically as great as finished. Revolutionary pioneers like Gregorio Ramirez in Costa Rica and José Ordóñez in Nicaragua had effectively energized up gigantic help for Focal American freedom. Vicente Fillosola, quite possibly of Iturbide's greatest ally, had been presented on Focal America to guarantee the extension to Mexico went on flawlessly notwithstanding. Nonetheless, as it became progressively far-fetched to endure, Fillosola looked for guidance from the Mexican Constituent Congress. His orders were basic: stop battling quickly with the supportive of conservatives and let the Focal Americans figure it out themselves. Vicente Fillosola wished Focal America best of luck and advanced back to Mexico, presumably depleted. In June 1823, the Mexican Congress requested a gathering with delegates from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. A gathering was set up to choose the eventual fate of Focal America for the last time, albeit the Mexicans had a genuinely smart thought of what was to come. On July 1, 1823, the public constituent gathering of Focal America officially declared its autonomy from Spain and Mexico. The district was to turn into the unified territories of Focal America under Broad José Arce. Albeit the new autonomy wasn't formally perceived until 1824, Mexican powers started pulling out from Focal America nearly right away. Also in 1824, Mexico formally acknowledged the new Focal America, as did the U.S. That August, President James Monroe officially welcomed Antonio José Cañas to Washington to set up political discussions and examine the way forward for the Focal American district. The organization of the region started to step-by-step break down. Yet by the 1840s, the US was officially perceiving every territory as a different country. Concerning Iturbide, the last affront came only a year after the previous Mexican sovereign escaped to Europe. He got back to Mexico, totally ignorant that he was currently a bandit in his nation of birth. Iturbide was captured, lastly executed in 1824. Today, Focal America contains 7 nations, the first 5 territories, in addition to Belize and Panama. The development and thriving of the district have been blended, for certain nations getting a charge out of ongoing monetary advancement, while others are still tracking down their direction. While the first 5 areas of the realm of Guatemala might have at one phase been important for Mexico, it was never intended to endure. Like any pilgrim domain that at long last feels prepared to make a clench hand of things all alone, the push for focal American freedom was inescapable.